values and ethics. Now, why is this so important to study? Ever since rabbinic times, Judaism was rooted, notably Jewish part, of course, with Jewish ritual, meaning the keeping of Shabbat, keeping kosher, davening 3 times a day, all the different prayer services. So what it meant to be a Jew was to observe the commandments, and most notably, the ritual commandments. That was halakha, Jewish law, in a sense, was Judaism. Now, at a deeper dimension, you might call the unseen dimension, that the great medieval teacher of the inner life, Bachya ibn Pakuda, he called them chovot halevavot, the duties of the heart. So he said, just as there are duties of what he called the limbs, and by that he meant also the eyes, the mouth, etc., where you might say observable Jewish practice, he noted that a person could be reciting the prayers, but we had no idea if they meant it. A person could be keeping the rituals of Shabbat, but we have no idea if they internalized it. So his book, called The Duties of the Heart, focused on sources in the Bible, in rabbinic literature, with the idea of kavanah, intentionality. And I read this book when I was in rabbinical school, and it was really a profound idea because this was not taught widely before he wrote this book. In the early Middle Ages, he wrote it in Arabic. He was under the influence of Arabic philosophy as well. There was an inner life movement concurrent with Muslims and Jews. Of course, you have it in the Sufi tradition, the Jewish mystical tradition, the focus on the inner life dimension of any observance. So with that, we have the idea, not only is there outer observance, but inner observance, that kavanah, intentionality, was as important or even more important than keva, you might say the observable fixed dimension. When you have the beginnings of liberal Judaism in Germany in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and so forth, there's a movement to focus on the inner life dimension, not the external dimension, because they found that people, this is in Germany, were leaving the Judaism in droves because they didn't understand Hebrew, found the long service interminable, boring, and incomprehensible, and therefore were not coming to synagogues. And so these were all Orthodox rabbis in Germany at the time. They had the choice. Do we focus on the inner life dimension, abridge the service, and make it comprehensible and meaningful to German Jews? They work on the forms of Judaism, not reformed Judaism, but reforming the practice of Judaism came to be called Reformed Judaism in Germany. Now, here's what they decided to do. If it is not halakha, what is our religion based on? So here are 2 things they said and 1 thing that they didn't say, which I think has had tragic consequences. The 2 things they said is Judaism is focused on reasoning. You can make a very good argument for that when you look at the Talmud, which is mostly a reasoning document. You go to the great Jewish philosophers such as Maimonides, where there's a great focus on reasoning, especially legal reasoning and moral reasoning. And they decided that the pillars of Judaism were reason and ethics. They did not include what we would call today spirituality, meaning the inner adherence to a relationship with the divine. Another time I'll tell you reasons why I think they did not focus on that. I think it was a tragic mistake because when the reformers put all the emphasis on reason and ethics, and you might say an entire religious dimension, a denomination, of course, was focused on that. This basic attitude, by the way, was also adopted among the conservative and to some degree by the so-called modern Orthodox. Now, having grown up as a conservative Jew, I remember being taught, know your history, which is a knowledge idea, certainly not a spiritual idea. Be a good person, which was a very brief way of saying be ethical. Know the tradition, support the state of Israel, and don't marry a non-Jew. That's kind of what I came out with my conservative education. And even then, when I was in high school, I felt a spiritual emptiness in this approach. I had a bit of a problem with it, of course, because my mother married a non-Jew who converted to Judaism, and I was brought in a house of very devoted conservative Jews. So I thought the idea, instead of don't marry a non-Jew, maybe it would be to make Judaism so beautiful that intermarried couples would adopt the Jewish tradition. So I had problems with this entire approach ever since I was a teenager. So with this focus on Jewish ethics and Jewish values, now I'll share with you a mistake that was made that I mentioned last time, but I want to drive it home a little bit. There's really no such thing as a Jewish value or Jewish ethics from what I'll call a technical perspective, because values are universal. Ethics are universal. So a better way to say it would be ethics, which are norms of human behavior, good conduct toward each other, what you might call good character, not causing harm to each other, are universal ideas with a specific Jewish interpretation, a specific Jewish focus. So I prefer to say human ethics as articulated by the Jewish tradition. It's a long phrase, but for me it's more accurate. And the same thing with values. When people say to me, the value of education, well, that's not a moral value, because of course a person can be educated and not moral, and not educated and be quite moral. So we have to focus on moral values. Moral values are obligations to do no harm to others. It's a universal human value, benefit the good when possible, and many things that come from that. So as I mentioned last time, when the focus was on Jewish ethics, here's of course what generations of Jews afterwards, including my generation, were taught. You don't need to be Jewish to be a good person. In fact, the essence of Judaism is not being a good person, because if that were it, you don't need Judaism. Everybody can learn one way or another how to be a good person. So I think that was a tragic mistake. If someone were to ask me what it means to be Jewish, I would say it's a path to the divine, including rituals and texts that have inexhaustible transformative meaning that includes a path to character and moral behavior. I wouldn't put character and moral behavior first, because every authentic spiritual and religious tradition teaches something of that. I would focus on what I'm going to call the transformative dimension of understanding the depth and practices of our ritual tradition, from Orthodox to Reform, maybe maximal to minimal, and the transformative power of our text. Reform Judaism, tragically, was known for creating people who were focused on ethics, which became social ethics, which became a passion for taking care of the vulnerable in our society, which is laudable. And I hope no one is insulted by this, but understood also to be rather ignorant of our tradition. Now, sometimes I'll meet a person and they say, well, I don't keep Shabbat. I don't really know the tradition. I'm Reform. I thought, how tragic is this? That to be non-observant and ignorant is Reform, but I'm a good person. For me, that's in some ways the death knell of modern Judaism. So our congregation, of course, stands for trying to turn this around. Whatever we've been able to do, I think we've been able to do it somewhat. And that is a focus on the transformative dimension through our text and practices that creates, hopefully, a teaching on good character and a teaching on what you might call moral behavior, which is benefiting the good, not harming others, and enjoying ourselves in the struggle against evil in the world and, of course, the evil within.